let you know when we are live. Okay. I have to connect it to Facebook also, so it's showing that it's live. It's not exactly live yet. Okay. I think
this is so much more technologically advanced than I am. I'm just like, thank you.
It's really okay. It's really different from what I'm used to also. But I think we are live. I'm gonna triple check just so that because you never know with like technological platforms.
No,
okay. I am alive, at least
in live, yeah.
in live. So, yeah.
Okay, so we are fully live.
Okay, great.
Yay. Okay, so hello to everyone watching. I don't know what time it is for people who are watching. It is evening for me, afternoon for Andreas, and morning for Sophie. So we are very strangely crossing continents and countries right now. But today we are live with two of our hosts and curators of our upcoming courses at Advaya. Sophie is the host and curator of Rewilding Mythology, and Andreas is the host and curator of, well, the co-host and co-curator of Ecology of Love alongside Hannah, who is our lead curator. Who I think Hannah is watching, but I'm not super sure. But if Hannah's watching, hi Hannah.
Hannah, I'm sure you're watching.
Yeah, and so I wanted to keep the introduction short because people can look up both of your websites for all of the information. But for people who are watching and who are not aware, Sophie is a writer based in the Hudson Valley who focuses on the intersection of spirituality and storytelling and ecology. Andreas is a Berlin-based book and magazine writer and an independent scholar whose work is focusing on a reevaluation of our understanding of the living. And I wanted to begin by acknowledging that this conversation, like the introduction, is incredibly short, and it's going to be an introduction to both of their work that is so rich and so deep that this conversation is only going to be an introduction. So it's not going to be able to cover everything, unfortunately. Yeah, and I'm just kind of like in awe also because I've been like knee deep in both of your work. Sophie, you know, I'm always reading like your essays, and Andreas, I just like I want to say like 3/4 way into rereading Matter and Desire for Ecology of Love, and there's so much in both of your work. So I'm really excited and thankful that you're spending some time with us to share just a little bit and a little slice of that today. And so I think the first question is a very introductory one for people to get a sense of what you both do. So I wanted to know what questions are you both exploring right now? They can be as broad or as niche, and please feel free to ramble, and then we'll see what comes through. So whoever one of you feels called to start.
I'm curious about what you're up to, Andreas.
Well, I'm much more curious about what you're doing, but I mean, you're as you feel like, but you have that morning freshness. Maybe you should.
I should go first. Okay. I am finishing right now. If I'm going to be totally honest and not actually try and package this, I'm finishing an eco-spiritual memoir, which is trying to trouble ideas of healthism and the idea of health as being something that is an individual responsibility, and how we have precluded more feral types of wellness and joy when we have narrowly prescribed what correct embodiment is supposed to look like. And as someone who's really interested in microbiology and symbiosis, I've been thinking about how disability is actually kind of an invitation to collaboration. That lacks in a body are moments when you have to risk collaborating with another body, and moments, the moments of most biological novelty in our, the history of the earth are moments when two beings risk their shapes and merge. Like lichen, we have the mycorrhizal symbiotic fungi and plants. We see all of these, we have the original endosymbiotic cells half digesting each other. And so I'm really interested in these lacks in our bodies, not as being something to problematize or fix and bring us back into kind of like cultural legibility, but to start thinking of them as invitations to more risky co-becoming. Yeah, So that's something I'm inside of right now.
Lovely, thank you. And I know that there's another book of yours coming up soon, being sold soon. So I realized that, like me, you only the normal state is to have one book nearly on the desk in the bookstore, and another book on your computer, and another book somewhere in the back of your mind, and another book somewhere in the soil, maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yes, I'm. And before I start, I want to acknowledge the land I'm on right now. And I'm actually not in Berlin. I'm in Italy. I'm in the Apennines. I'm in the upper Vada Valley, which is in Liguria, close to Genoa, between Genoa and Pisa. And so I'm part of this watershed, and I want to acknowledge all these beings which I've gone through with this brutal summer, and just as representatives, the oaks, who still don't color, they don't have their autumn colors, they're still green, and the wild oregano and the sage, which has started to reflower like in another spring, and the water of the river, which is running through myself when I drink water from the tap, which is actually the water of the river. So this is these beings are all with me all the time, and they support me and they teach me. And so what I'm after right now at the moment, you can glean already from what I've said. So I'm going on to pursue my quest of understanding reality as an inside, not just as an assemblage of stuff or objects or things, but as an inside, which means as an experience, as subjectivity, as desire, as yearning, as lust for life. And I have become very deeply immersed in a very outspoken animistic view. So I'm addressing all beings as persons with whom I share this reality, which is an insight, but which is also such a beautiful radiant body, or so many beautiful radiant bodies with whom I am all the time exchanging myself. And this again is something which happens also on the inside. So I'm somehow going deeper and deeper in this. I'm very much fascinated with that, with actually being only on the inside part of that inside. But that's an inside story for now, maybe. Yeah, thanks.
I love that. And I wanted to mention, I was going to mention it later in the conversation, but I think it's coming up now for sure. When Sophie, you were mentioning exploring like lack and exploring what happens when two beings risk their shape and merge. I feel like that almost word for word like echoes Andreas's book. There are parts of that book that I can hear like it's almost the same words or like the same thing being said in different words. So it's really interesting how I mean, I know both of your work is kind of like influenced by each other, but not necessarily at the time of writing those books and those essays. So it's really interesting that now you both are in conversation when you're exploring like similar ideas and coming from such different backgrounds as well. That's very exciting for me to like watch happen. It's almost like watching magic happen in front of me. So I'm really excited right now, actually. I'm going to have like such a burst of energy when I go to sleep later, but but moving on. So I
want to acknowledge that when I encountered your work, Andreas, it was like I had finally found someone who was stitching language to the type of kind of microbial anarchic animism that I felt kin to, but had never been described. So if I am echoing those words, it's because I am directly inspired by them. And in particular, there's this part of enlivenment, your book Enlivenment, that just it's become so foundational to all of my thinking, which is just we have to understand that our individual aliveness is not the most important thing. It's about contributing to the general aliveness, sometimes at the risk of our own individual self. And that, as someone who has, an incurable illness and who's constantly trying to think about how to give my life meaning without becoming hyper fixated on my own progress and my own wellness, that has been an incredibly helpful reframe.
Thank you, Sophie. Yes, yeah, I'm actually honored that you've been inspired by my work, because I'm also inspired by your work. So it's a great honor. And Tammy, I think it's okay if I just respond and take up something, because I think, Sophie, you said something which I find extremely important, and which actually can direct in somewhere to look where normally we in Western civilization rarely look, and that is that life is not about us first, and so much is about this in our culture, is about this. First, you look after yourself, and you have to survive. You have to be better, and actually, the whole, or let's say, the mainstream interpretation of Darwinism is also about this, and that's in my eyes profoundly misguided, and so in betting only on individual survival, well-being, sheltering off, keeping yourself dry at the expense of others. Unfortunately, maybe you even say this, we lose actually what life is after, or what life is about. And we, interestingly, if you do this, and I think many people who tried and somehow not succeeded and remained still suffering and still not contented, know that even if you try to look only after yourself, you don't really find yourself. So it's, you don't even serve yourself if you don't serve life. And I think it's truly a part of my work to expand my search in a way that it's not about me, it's about life.
I love that. Yeah. And I oftentimes think about how, we are patterns rather than we are these static objects. And in order to maintain that pattern, you have to keep intaking otherness. So in a certain way, self is always about appetitively inviting in otherness to build your body. And when you start to keep out the otherness, your body breaks down, you stop moving, you stop maintaining a self.
Yeah, it's somehow there. It's so obvious if you look at this, even from a biological side. So as you all know, I've been a student of biology, and I've been doing the basic research of all this, where my thinking is still founded upon, as a theoretician of biology, studying with I'd say a master of philosophy of biology, or even you could even say spiritual biology now, Francisco Varela in Paris, the Chilean biologist. And the interesting thing is actually that this fiction of being or needing to be autonomous or sovereign is contradicting basic observances, basic stuff happening in your cell at every moment, or between your cells and other cells at every moment. So actually, and I mean, it's crazy because biology is a very well advanced science, and they're not doing dumb stuff there. So they have the means, and then still mainstream biology is somehow overlooking this foundational feature that every living being, in order to create herself or himself, is constantly rebuilding from others and constantly breaking down in order to feed others. So this is so foundational, and it's absolutely not part of our understanding of the world. So this is really crazy, actually.
Absolutely agree. Yes. That we have to keep the lymphatic movement of matter happening. Sometimes I think that human beings are just vessels for, matter that was in a hummingbird 100 years ago to bump into matter that was in the same hummingbird and another human being somewhere else. Like, we are facilitating like microscopic reunions that we never even know that we are the vessel for.
When you talk about a hummingbird, I think about a favorite cartoon. Actually, it's just a simple cartoon, and it shows a bird and a baby bird, and the mother bird or the daddy bird, whatever, the raising bird says to the baby bird, "You're the universe pretending to be a bird."
Yeah.
It's very simple. No, but I mean, the interesting thing. No, let me say that actually, let me just take a breath, because it's really profound to understand that that we are actually in a sort of continuum with all other life. It's really profound, because it's so against our normal understanding of what individual life is. And it doesn't mean that our individual life is somehow an illusion. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that, okay, actually, so everything is one thing and I'm actually an illusion, because there's this tendency in spiritual understanding to throw the baby out with the bathwater and to make stuff less complex again, only in another direction. And to say, well, actually, there's no individuality, and there's only one like big loving universe or whatever. But it's much more complicated like this. It's actually we're living through these individuations which burst forth, but which can only exist if they continuously transform into others, into other individuations, and if they pay tribute, or if they give themselves to them. So we're real, but we're real as being part of something which is much bigger, or much more bigger is maybe not even a good word, much deeper than our existence. And it's to me, it's so important to keep this paradoxical relationship open, because then you can, if you acknowledge paradox, then you start to understand all these paradoxical situations in your own existence, which don't resolve if you want to make them simple, like all sort of relationship conundrums on the physical plane or on a relationship plane, and you need to understand this paradox of being not one, not two, to get them. And
Yeah, I love that rejection of a kind of homogenizing universalism, this idea that, we're all one. I oftentimes think of myself as, I believe in a kind of like patchy pantheism, where it's the gradients that keep things moving. It's the differences that keep the lymph of life, the lymph of matter, moving from one being into another being. And if everything is just on the same plane, there's no movement, there's no life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's actually one. And then I'll ask you something, Sophie, because I want to know something. But just to be a little bit, to keep a little bit on this, in this profoundly metaphysical place, right? Because I really happen to ask myself. I think I did this when I was like 2 years old or 5 years old or something. It's actually, why is this actually happening? That that life itself needs to step out of itself and differentiate, and then undergo suffering in differentiation. So I mean, that's a profound question, actually. It's why is it happening like this? Because and I don't know if I ever understand it, actually.
I actually have a biological example that's been helping me understand just
That's great.
This.
If I'm asking you metaphysical questions and you're giving me a biological example, that's fantastic. Go ahead.
I've been fascinated with the Deloid rotifer, which is asexual and should have gone extinct, but hasn't. And they're trying to figure out how it's continued to remix its DNA without meiotic sex. And one of the theories is, which I think is very interesting, I was talking about this with Bayo Komolafe recently, as we were talking about trauma, is that it's much more hardy and resilient than even the tardigrade. It can withstand intense radiation. It can be thrown out into space. It can be desiccated for 23,000 years and then come back to life. But that these traumatic events break apart its DNA, and when it's rehydrated, the DNA restitches itself back together, but incorrectly, and also oftentimes chimerically adding in other species' DNA. So instead of having sex, it's these moments of fragmentation, of trauma, that actually create novelty and help these beings to adapt and evolve. And so as someone who's known really intense violence and trauma, that fragmented me internally and also fragmented me from normalcy, I've thought sometimes like, well, it was a way of, when I've stitched myself back together, I've had to inappropriately take other species and plants and fungi and insects and put them back in those missing places. That it's made me new in a way that just normal life would not have made me new.
Yeah, lovely. Yes. So there is a foundational impulse which is about bringing forth life, in whose service actually these happenings, which might be traumatic if you undergo them, are. But it's still a foundational impulse of giving life. I'd see it like this. Yes. And I mean, thanks for reminding me of the rotifer. I remember from my university times the ways these animals are able to retract into something and then still need to rebuild themselves from other material. I mean, it's also a very interesting example for the way organismic life is never pure in the sense of having a pure lineage to be healthy. So it's actually, you gave an example for basically the opposite. So only by being able to recreate oneself or to imagine oneself anew as messy, you could live.
And there's a line from you, about that I love so much, which is, to be alive is to be enmeshed in a mess that must be constantly negotiated. I have quoted you so many times about this.
Thank you. It's always good if I try to more or less say something I said before better, if there's somebody in the room and says, well, I have a quotation. No, but I mean, I think this is so important because there's a tendency in people who somehow are solidarious with nature. I air quote nature because I don't use that word anymore. I try to not to use it anymore. And because they have this feeling that everything is ordered and everything is somehow put in these containers in which and if it remains in these containers, everything is nice and healthy and will go on forever. And I mean, the idea of nature is something which, if you see it from that idealistic stance, is really about everything going right. No? And then you say, oh, we need to go back to nature and we only need to believe in nature and then everything will be okay. And if you look at it, and I mean, what you just quoted is just there's so many, actually, if you look into anything alive, you will see it is messy. And it's so important to see this, to see that that life is not about being clear and clean and unambiguous, but to the contrary, and that healing comes from this contrary, and not from the fixed thing, which might be in fixed binaries or in fixed lines or fixed lineages, and that's again something which you can easily show if you just browse through libraries of empiric results, but normally you don't. But biologists don't do this because they're not interested in this, or they don't want to look at this. But it's something empirical, actually. It's not a fantasy, like the rotifer. You quoted scientific studies, actually.
Yeah.
And I just read about the fact that if we bring this a little bit more still into the idea that life is queer at its fundamentals, I just read about biological sex in humans, and I found that because I will cover some of this in that series as well. So I need to get back. I need to get back on track in this. And so I actually discovered that all of us, in our billions of cells, we have cells, our own cells of the other sex. So we have cells which are as they are sex in human is by these X or Y chromosomes defined by this, and so we have cells of the different sex in our own bodies, like regularly, like all the time. I think this is really amazing, right? Because then we already know that even that identity, which to some people might seem easy because you have a Y or you have an X, it's not easy like this. It's still a negotiation, and it's still a negotiation is always open to comments from all sides, like cultural influence or life events or early trauma or the trauma of your parents, and it's not clear, it's not pure, because if it was pure, we couldn't go on imagining something new. I find this really interesting. I mean, it's just the tip of the iceberg. If you look deeper, you find a really messy situation. Actually, I had some deep thoughts about myself thinking about this. Okay, now I'm trying to connect with these double X cells in my body, and let's see how I might feel very different actually if I do this.
Definitely. I just read a great book called Bitch by the zoologist Lucy Cook about how, if we look at gender as it occurs in many other animals, it's a very rhizomatic, strange, gooey, non-binaristic experience. And that our conflation of certain types of sex hormones or certain types of characteristics with a certain type of sexual behavior is very incorrect. Which I love, like, hyenas who have these clitorises that are bigger than the male hyena's penises, and who have more testosterone in them and are bigger than the male hyenas. I mean, there's so many interesting examples that complicate our ideas of how these things happen. Yeah, I mean, for me, I like to think about, our bodies change our whole lives. We have to change in order to keep being alive, and so our genders, our sex, would also have to change, I would expect. It would be, I oftentimes say, like, let your sexuality, let your gender lunate, like, let it go through cycles and change every day, and then check in, like, say, like, what am I feeling like today? That because we're, if we look at a cultural body, like a traumatized bodies need stable value systems so that they can feel safe. And right now there's so much collective, ecological, social trauma that we're very fixated on stable value systems like binaristic gender. But the truth is that underneath that, there's something much more gooey and interesting happening. And so we should always complicate these value dualisms that we create.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to talk a little bit about trauma, because that's also something I've been working on. But before, I wanted to just add that many cultures in human history and still on Earth, they don't only have binary sexes. They have a third sex, or they have different. It's very complicated, but they have lots of assignment to other roles, and they're much more flexible actually, and many of them, at least. I mean, you can't put cultures. You need to look at every culture, but you find many cultures who are much more like life itself and its flexibility, and our culture, unfortunately, has so become fixated with these either/or things. That's just the fundamental colonialistic mindset. Like, either you're us or we kill you ideas. it has so much pulled away actually from the way from the way we're breathing, or from the way we are. I mean, it's just a part of us which is forced to think in these binary ways when we grow up, but the remainder of ourselves, the workings of our flesh, and also the imaginings of our flesh, or of our soul in flesh, still follow the rhizomatic ways. I mean, we can't do any other, because we immediately die. And I mean, that's actually what's going to happen if we go on these binary lines. But concerning trauma, it's actually, I built myself already a bridge, because this binary way of not acknowledging what there is, and telling, oh no, this is not there, it's different, I tell you, and if you don't obey, I beat you. It's to my eyes really foundational to the culture we are speaking from. Yeah. So it's maybe it's a hint to why so many people don't see the things which can be seen, and why so many people don't look at what they'd even like to look at, maybe in depth, because trauma is somehow self-reinforcing, and it births these protective mechanisms where you don't have to look at that what causes your trauma. So if you're living in Western civilization, you can't look at the sources which somehow brought the mainstream to deny mutual transformations instead of binary oppositions, and it's so painful. And I think we really, to understand our culture, we need to know that we're living in full trauma, in a traumatic culture. Like it's really, really bad, and normally we somehow normalize this, so many of us don't think of it, but still we behave like this. And just to finish, I just learned that that trauma actually does also bodily changes to us, and it actually changes the genes by putting little things on it, by putting methyl ends on them, methylation. And the interesting thing is that I realized when I heard this, I realized that, okay, actually, if this happens, there's not only the protective mechanism which stops us from doing this soul work, but there's also a change in our DNA. So a traumatized species of Homo sapiens becomes a different species because he has slightly different genes. I mean, this is also profound. It's not that you can't change it back. It goes away if you realize to somehow confront this trauma, but so it's on both sides. Again, it's inside and it's outside, and we because these gene changes, they are inherited to our children. So I'm traumatized by the trauma my grandparents suffered in war, in the last war, I need to say, and I think our culture doesn't take this into account. We in the mainstream, people are still arguing from this. Okay, we never were so well off like in these times, and what is your problem? But it's not at all like this.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we have crystallized the trauma debate in a way that keeps it from moving. And as someone who I knew extraordinarily violent trauma before the age of 3, and I've been told that I have to spend money to come back into normalcy, and then I've told, I have a genetic illness that my brother apparently also inherited it as well. But as you said, the trauma acted as some kind of catalyst to make that genetic illness manifest in me with extraordinary intensity. And then my brother, who didn't experience this early trauma, didn't do it. So that's kind of like a little test example of how trauma can ignite these physical manifestations. It can wake up our genes. And but I also think that there's a way in which the traumatized body is a doorway out of anthropocentric narratives. It kept my sensory gating open in a way that other people culturally gate themselves down. We we have to gate out so much stimuli in order to navigate a day-to-day basis that we're gating out the aliveness of the world. But for traumatized people, their nervous system has to be awake all the time. And that can be a bad thing, and it can fatigue you, and it can open you up to actually, illness. But it conversely, paradoxically, because we're going to hold the paradox, opens you up to noticing, moss and fungi and weather patterns and disturbances in phenological cascades that other people are noticing. And so I sometimes want to say I'm becoming something quite differently. Like, I think of those first cells that ate each other to create the multicellular beings we are today. So our cells are created through this traumatic event where two cells half digested each other. And, I've never digested the trauma. I've never integrated it. I've never healed. But there's something about that undigested quality of the trauma in me that has forced me into a new shape, that has forced me to behave and to look at things in a different way. So I also think, so we can think of ourselves as being a traumatized population, as being a problem. But if we begin to dance with that trauma in more interesting ways, maybe we will become in more interest. We will see futures that we would have never seen from the atomized individual, the atomized, untraumatized individual.
Yeah, lovely. I mean, I think that's you just described life's way to work with that, and I also hear I really understand that you resonate a lot with Bayo Akomolafe on that because he's actually also a profound thinker of trauma, of death, of destruction as something which it does not need, we must not push aside or overcome, but somehow let us transform, and in this let itself transform through us. Yeah, I mean, I know that you're. I read about what you wrote about Margulis' great finding, Lynn Margulis' great finding of Endosymbiosis, and she was a dear colleague of my teacher Varela, actually, so they were somehow in the same boat. And I remember when I was in school, in undergraduate school, that she wasn't still accepted. There was still a competing theory. I had to learn both. So it's relatively fresh. I mean, depending on how I look at my own age, right? So it's relatively fresh. But it's actually what happened. I'm retracing what you said because I like it how you put it. It was a disaster because one bacterium ate another one. Like bacteria eat others and even ourselves by pulling it into themselves. That's also very interesting, and making them themselves, and normally by breaking down. And this time the bacterium was not digested, and it roamed around in the other one, and then slowly, or maybe even quickly, we don't know, became a fertile part of this, became it somehow. And now these little beings are what biologists call the mitochondria, which provide us with oxygen, or which don't provide us with oxygen, but which provide us with energy, or the chloroplasts in the green plants. So they actually absolutely crucial roles, and they still have to do with eating or being eaten in a way. It's about energy. It's about keeping us alive, and I mean, isn't that poetic? What life made from a catastrophe? Isn't that absolutely beautiful? Although there was no optimist hanging around and said, just keep a stiff upper lip and make the best of it. It was like fully undergoing this, and then, but still, still keeping an eye on life. I mean, not in a conscious way, but I mean, preferencing life and not what is happening to my individuality, because life will come forth with a solution, will come forth with something which can be given. Let's put it like this. Yeah, it's very, very profound. But it's also, it's also, to trust this really means to not know, because you can't do it in the way, you can't sell people healing by knowing and telling them, okay, now you need to do this and undergo this pain, and now you have to die in this manner, and then you will for sure, etc. You can't do this because you don't know. We don't know, because there's something which, by desiring for existence, lures this forth, which is not controllable. So it's actually about trust. It's actually about letting go and delivering ourselves to life. Believe in and again, we again there believe in the aliveness more than believing in our own sovereignty.
Yeah. Everything underlined. But it's, I think we need these deep time frames to help us understand that we're never going to techno-narcissistic figure out how to exit this. We're never going to be able to plan, and optimize human survival. That we are part of a grand respiratory, the earth going through all of these different extinction events that then create a bottleneck where other species diversify. Like, I was talking to Tammy the other day about how we are the product of an extinction event. The open space opened up by an extinction event is what created us. That we would, that our precise morphology and flavor only comes into being because of these niches are opened up that then have to be filled again. So
true. Yeah.
We have to kind of sometimes pull back and realize that we don't understand. This event can look like the apocalypse, but to the general aliveness of the earth, it looks like just another experimental day.
Yeah. There's a quote from Richard Powers. I always remembered, which is hard to digest, but it's basically that. He said, nature has nothing against extinction because she works with it. Yeah. And I mean that's it's hard to digest unless you somehow surrender to being this force as well. So if you're just somehow just the on the side which is constantly rearranged without having any connection with that which arranges, then it becomes very frightening in a way. But I think there is a direct line, or maybe you could also say there's a remote chamber in our heart where we are this power who is, without knowing, always letting creation burst forth. So we're absolutely connected to this. Only it's a connection that we cannot manage like our civilization decided we need to manage everything. We cannot manage it in any way. We can only keep it alive by nourishing it, and we need to nourish it with ourselves. But it won't annihilate ourselves, because in this remote place we are just this. And I mean, at this point it becomes very, very it becomes some a mystery. And I think this is a mystery which actually will remain a mystery. It won't be bridgeable, because to bridge that would mean that we somehow would acquire the control over this, and we will never. So this will never happen. As in the same way as life cannot be extinguished, life cannot be killed, because life is the way reality gives itself forth. So it can't die. And in the same way, we won't know. So that's such a, I mean, this combination, of having this so close, and on the other hand of never actually being absolutely able to control it and even to rationally grasp it, brings us in a very good position, I think, because then we can surrender like wholeheartedly, happily, because we know surrendering doesn't mean that we somehow disappear, we somehow lose grips. We'll just stay in the middle, only in the way that we have no control about. And I mean, in the situations in my life where I managed to do this, it was always great. It doesn't mean that it didn't hurt, but it was making me more alive, actually. And yeah, it's another thing our civilization doesn't know at all. And I think yeah, it's a way to somehow cope with that historical place we're in right now, because this is very much about the big wheels turning, and yeah, without any there is no real control of humans. So that's a time where this false dream will go to rest, but this rest will be will also be not easy. It won't be sweet. It will also be a meal in a way, a huge composting.
You know, it's interesting. I think that, you know, when death happens in a way that is, you know, sewn into food webs, it's the moment when a singular aliveness is leaks past a singular aliveness into a polyphony of aliveness. You know, I remember watching a deer's body decompose and become not just one deer story, but bacterial, fungal, beetles, many different stories. So, you know, death is the moment when life overflows its cup and gets too big for one shape. But the problem, I think, with the way we're living right now is that we don't know how to make ourselves food. You know, there's a part of your course I think about becoming edible, and I think about that a lot as someone who I am actively decaying at a much faster rate than most people. There's no cure. There's no way to stop that process. But how can I recontextualize this process as becoming good soil? Like, how can I think about my life and my actual body as being the soil to grow something else, rather than as being an end in and of itself? You know, we put bodies in the ground filled with chemicals and then in concrete encasements so they can't enter back into the food web. So it would seem to me right now that something that we're being asked to do is very literally how to make ourselves food, and also how to learn how to eat the shit that we create. Like, we create so much pollution, so much toxic sludge that we don't weave back into food webs, that we don't tailor to another being's appetite. So how can we begin to reweave these food webs again that we've you know, constructed?
Yeah. I love this, becoming good soil. And you know, if somebody asked you, how shall I love? I think that would be an appropriate answer. Become good soil.
Yeah.
And if you do it, I mean, I'm really serious. I'm not metaphorically, but like really, literally. And you see, this would be one of these Zen conundrums, you know, where the one who asked was like, what? But if you really literally do this, then this is a process of love. And it's a process of love, not only because it's good to become good soil, but it's a process of love because you allow your own aliveness by allowing the aliveness of others, or you're creating your own story, to use your words, Sophie, by letting the others create their stories. And that's, in my eyes, that's a practice of love. And it's absolutely concrete. It's not metaphorical. So I think it would really be an exercise. It would be really hard to do this. And that's just the problem. We talked about the traumatic heritage we're all filled with, but it would be very hard to do this because we're so remote from this. But on one hand, I think this is why I'm so much in love with indigenous cultures, traditional cultures, because in many respects they just do this. They're becoming good soil, and by this also building relationships on the level of the human heart and on the level of the heart of every living person. And so I think you sounds paradoxical, but you can't evade that by making yourself alive in a way that enables aliveness to go on. Then you'll be a loving person, and that will help life again, in a way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I keep this in mind when somebody asks me in a way, then I'll come with this Sophie Zen practical idea. First become good soil.
First become good soil. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also just don't let life stagnate in you. Let it keep moving. I think about that with ideas too. Like we have such an idea of authorship, but the truth is that for most of human culture, storytelling knowledge was oral, relational, and it never belonged to a single person. So if you have a good idea, give it away.
Yes. I'm interrupting you because I just want to acclaim this. It's absolutely horrible. Yeah. It's so horrible. You remember at the beginning when Tammy was asking, well, actually it sounds somehow, and then we somehow untangled authorship in a way. But actually traditional cultures never do this, because we are in service of life, and it's important. Life is important, and not who is doing it. I mean it should go by itself. You're totally right, and that's again this traumatic narcissistic, how did you call it, techno-narcissistic way of
siloing our minds, our ideas, our authorship. Yeah,
you need to be better than the others, otherwise you won't survive. Otherwise you can't protect yourself. It's absolutely crazy. It never happened before. In hundreds of thousands or even millions of years of the existence of our phobias of humans, it never happened. It only happened now. And at the same time, as this authorship is so important, the service for that which carries us all has become absolutely non-existing. I mean, this is so it's absolutely, it's outrageous. If you really start to dig into this more deeply, it becomes so absurd. And yeah, okay. So that was just my acclaim to for mentioning.
Well, I think Tammy, me, and Andreas could talk for probably 4 hours, maybe much longer than that. So I just want to check in to see if there's anything you would like us to kind of like round off with.
No, I feel like I was just kicking it off as you went, and it's so funny because I feel like all the questions that I came with were like totally answered, but in like a completely like I couldn't even imagine how it would all be infused together, and it just like everything got answered, but like in a completely different way. And I'm just gonna present people also like when I eventually like edit and upload this video, I'm going to be like, well, these are the questions, and people will finally get context to like how did this discussion like happen. But I don't feel like I have like anything else to kind of ask to round this off. I feel like the only like last final thought that I wanted to bring in more directly would be, and this is really like the only thing that I have to ask is I would love for you both to talk about love. And I feel like there were bits and pieces of it in the conversation, but I would love to like give a little bit of time to have that.
Tammy, the secret is we talked about love all the time.
We did, yeah. The whole thing was about love.
But I was actually thinking, will anyone recognize? So I made it a bit more concrete by raving about this becoming good soul. But could you, Timmy, maybe could you ask it a little bit more concretely, because so what direction?
Yeah, so I think I'm really interested in, Andreas, your framing of the ecological eros. And I think that's really the key idea that I wanted to unpack. I feel like I don't even need to like ask a big question. That in itself is enough to trigger like a lot of conversation. So please go ahead and unpack that a little bit for us. Then maybe Sophie
Okay,
can.
I'll try to unpack it differently than I did before in 2 minutes. Well, actually, the basic idea that, well, there are two ideas in this. The one idea is that living your aliveness in the way it truly is amounts to a process of love, because loving means to be in a mutual transformation in the way that the other becomes alive while you become alive yourself. So that would be my mini definition of love. So it's a practice. It's not a nice feeling. It's a practice. And this is actually what happens in ecosystems. This is what, I mean, Sophie, you described that in the life stories of the deer decomposing. That's how ecosystems function. Only that in our binary colonistic vision, we said, oh, this is only about survival, but it's about mutual transformation in order to let individuals tell their life stories. And I can also say something about love between partners on the human plane, but I'll do this in the course. Now time is up. But I want to bring in the erotic. This might have been a little bit underrepresented here today. Well, actually, Eros is about something inside, experiential, linked to a body you touch, or a body you enter into, or you transform into. So it has to do with the relationship of the inner experience and the materiality. And my idea is actually that this whole process is erotic to its core. And I mean, when we were talking about composting and decomposition, and Sophie, I mean, no idea how much you're with me here, but I would say these are all erotic encounters. Only that we completely pushed Eros to this little human way of thinking about sex, but it's vastly more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Eros for me is appetite. It is that lack in me that enchains me to another body. And I think about those, the initial bacteria, like chemosensing their way towards sweetness, and that, the first sense is keyed by appetite. It is a movement towards sweetness. And it's that appetite for me that is Eros, that it is our need to consume, to keep being, that enchains us to other bodies. That you say that life has a tendency to create a meshwork of bodies, and that seems to me to be the Eros of life. And that usually doesn't look like two human beings making love and then leaving each other. It doesn't look like a discrete experience. It's often permanent. It's mycorrhizal fungi in plants creating an endosymbiotic merger that then never disappears. Most lovemaking is permanent and never and destroys the species that it involved. So I think for me, appetite is the core of love. That is, it is this gnawing sense in matter that it needs something else in order to keep moving. Yeah, I love the word haptikos, haptics, to touch, which also means to enchain. And I think that whenever I like the stickiness of that word, of that Greek word to touch, because what it says is everything we touch, we are enchained with. We sediment into it. That nothing we touch do we ever leave.
Yeah. So actually, also the human encounter, the sexual encounter, is something which will remain with you all the time. Only people tend to forget this. They tend to think, no, well, actually, it hasn't been anything. It was just I already forgot about it. But it's not true. It also stays with you all the time. So this is why you need to be much more careful with this, because it will stay with you all the time. On the level of entanglement from the inside, but also on embodied levels, you could also show this. And I mean, you after you spoke, I think I'd extend this idea of Eros actually to to the life's desire to bring forth, extending on this sensual plane. So actually everything emanating from life's desire to bring forth is eros. So that is the power to bring forth is eros. So you see, this is a profound force. It's nothing to mess with just from a hedonistic standpoint. I'm getting this little sweet stuff out of it, and then I leave it and go away. You can't do it. And in Greek myth, Eros was a god, and it's the god of creating, of bringing forth.
Yeah. I mean, who is I was reading someone who was saying that every time two people meet, something is born, that there's a third element, that every encounter, be it physical or spiritual, creates a child, and you have to be careful about those encounters.
Yes.
That even
Yes.
passing encounters with people will gestate some third element. Yeah.
Yeah,
so even in these digital encounters, there is something born.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What strange offspring we have created.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I love this. I know it's been an hour, but obviously this could go on forever. So I will respect and honor both of your time, and we will call it here. But that I just want to say that, like, I'm so deeply thankful for this conversation, and also for both of your work. I'm still like digesting a lot of what just happened, and I think it'll take a long time for me to even after coming back to it, I'm still going to be like, what was that whole thing? So and that's kind of the best thing, because I feel like any work that I'm like that doesn't leave me like that, I feel like unsatisfied. So I feel so satisfied that I'm like so confused, but also like so deeply like understood and like understanding like at the same time. So yeah, I'm thank you so much to both of you for being here, and to people who have been watching, people who will be watching, and I am really excited for both of the courses coming up, and really excited for actually the people who will be experiencing both of your courses together. There are quite a few people who are signed up for both of your courses, so I think a lot of people will be seeing these two like parallel inquiries. And I mean, I think it's people have obviously signed up for a reason and can see that there's so much like that converses, and that interweaves. And yeah, I'm really excited to see all the offspring
from
the courses and from the people.
Maybe you better say, instead of digesting, you're still digesting, you say gestating.
Yes.
That's more it's more apt to
Yeah, amazing. Okay, I'm gonna end the broadcast, and that will end the live, but